Welcome to Rise from Lausanne, Switzerland, where the local authorities just announced a 100 franc voucher for any tourist who spends 2 nights in a hotel this summer. I'm Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from beautiful springtime London, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us on Rise from across 50 countries, 40 institutions. My name is Anita Mendiratta, excited and delighted to co-host this once again with Professor Hodari. This is our 9th episode of Rise. We are really grateful to everyone who's joined us from across the world after these weeks, and which has been a very strange time for us all. So thank you for coming together. As every week we get together to get a sense of what's happening in our world, how do we reflect on these times, what's been changing, and what do we need to know going forward. This week, we are very excited, well, I'm very excited, to have our focus being on air travel, altitude and attitudes, because ultimately, no matter what we want in travel, tourism, and hospitality, we need the airlines. So we have an exciting program ahead. Demian, why don't you tell us more?
Sure. Well, we have 2 expert executives in residence with us today to help us answer one of the big questions facing really not only the travel industry, but the hospitality industry overall. And that's whether and when people will really start to fly again. What will be the differences between business and leisure travel, international and domestic, short haul and long haul? How will airlines and airports manage the crowds and protocols? Will travelers adhere to them? And perhaps most important of all, what about masks on a plane? Will that be the new Samuel L. Jackson film this summer? So as we move forward, from that attempt at a little bit of humor, we want to remind everybody that we love to answer your questions throughout the show. So please feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to get some questions to Anita and I for later in the show, as well as to our experts for the executives in residence segment a little bit later. And as always, we love to start with you. So we've got a question that we'd love you to answer, and here it is. All right, Anita. Looks like most hesitant about public transportation, followed by gym and sports, dentist, doctor, dining out, least of all hair and beauty treatments. I'm actually not that surprised. I mean, I think public transport's been the thing we've been most hesitant about in my family, at least because of my orders to my kids. How about you?
I must say, I'm enjoying this and I'm smiling from the point of view of, I think this is also a really good indication of what people are yearning for when the world opens up again. And it's haircuts, it's going to restaurants, and it's being able to have those doctor and dentist appointments. So I think this is also a matter of prioritization. I am intrigued that hair and beauty treatments are coming out at #1 in terms of what's going to be first. So very good indicator, and as always, invaluable to have our viewers sharing what they think is going on in the world around us. So thank you for that. So when we talk about what's going on in the world around us, we look at, as we always do, what in the world is going on and what do we need to be conscious of that's happened in the world in this past week. This has been a very interesting week, which I know I say every single week, but every single week has been interesting in terms of the constancy of changes that we're facing. As we try to do every week, we try to separate the news from the noise. So fascinating, 100 days ago, the COVID-19 pandemic was declared a global pandemic. It's amazing to think it's 100 days. And we've always used that indicator, but it shows how we're 100 days in, and we certainly have more days to go. 80% of those who are affected are asymptomatic or mildly ill, as we know. And yes, it has been confirmed that those people can indeed spread the virus unknowingly and undesiringly. As a result, we see leaders around the world are really struggling. It's a no-win situation for a leader right now, because how do we face a global, invisible, fatal crisis? So what we're seeing is that decisions are being made about the health crisis vis-a-vis the economic crisis that's happening. European governments are debating between, is it 2 meters or is it 1 meter? What is the right distance for social distancing? And that will come up very much in our conversation when it comes to the airlines and managing protocols through the system. We see that there are easing of restrictions, and we've seen that with that 2-week lead time in terms of has the virus spread. We're finding that, as an example, in the States, out of 50 states that all had restrictions, 19 of them have shown, with the easing of restrictions and Memorial Day and the protests and other gatherings, we're starting to see the case numbers increasing. This is very concerning. And we just had this morning, interestingly, Beijing has put in a second lockdown because of more cases being found in the last 72 days, 76 new cases. So we're still living in that time of uncertainty. I must admit, when I saw what was happening in the UK, it's very sad to see that primary schools were wanting to reopen, but they can't because of distancing and numbers of people. But one of my clients told me about the fact that apparently there were new regulations put in the UK about bubbles. And I got very excited thinking, I, as a champagne drinker, really want to know, what are the official regulations about bubbles? Sadly, it wasn't about the bubbles I was hoping for, but it is an important bubble because it shows that governments around the world are recognizing the damage that is being caused by isolation. So single adults are now allowed to find support bubbles. So families that they can see on a regular basis and even stay overnight with, because that mental health component is becoming increasingly important. But we are still in uncertain times. The now normal is showing that we still need to understand the scale of the COVID-19 impact, what it means as the year unfolds, and what is the acceptable level of risk. We know we need to get economies going, we need to get travel and tourism going, but at what point does it become just too dangerous? And this leads us to our next slide. Just very quickly going over this, there was a study done in April, which is very interesting to see how are people coping. And as much as we see that there's a massive drive in video and phone calls and people being able to connect, sadly, and this links to Demian's favorite word of COVID-19, it's all about the huggability. So for all of the technology that we have, as much as we're able to get together through our screens, people from a well-being point of view are feeling that this is impacting them, because ultimately touch matters, relationships matter, well-being matters, and that well-being is directly linked to people being able to connect, not just online, but offline as human beings, not just as internet IDs. Demian, what did you discover this week?
I got a couple different points. The first one I thought was really interesting was Google Maps announcing the alerts for COVID-19 travel. So these are alerts about when you're driving or riding on public transport and what you might be facing there in terms of COVID-19 checkpoints, especially for driving, whether there's going to be a checkpoint crossing a border. So they haven't fully announced all the details of this, but what I liked was the idea of how is technology going to be used not only to help us manage the crisis better, but also how is it going to help us travel with a little bit more peace of mind. The second thing is today's a big day here in Europe, lots of borders opening up between countries, still a lot of confusion, not clear policies, not always reciprocal policies. I mentioned last week the Italy and Switzerland issue in terms of they're not reciprocating the rights for people to travel back and forth. But it is still a positive sign that governments feel somewhat more confident to open up the economy and travel as long as they can continue to monitor any uptick in the spread of the virus. So we hopefully travel will rebound in a safe and healthy way. Two interesting examples of the way governments are trying to support tourism. The first is the Maltese government that is giving residents 100-euro vouchers to spend in hotels or restaurants and bars in order to help revitalize the local tourism sector. Particularly hard hit first, it's 25% normally of the Maltese GDP. But secondly, some major source markets like Britain and Italy are excluded from the countries that are going to be permitted to travel to Malta when the borders open up on July 1st. And I thought was really interesting was in Cyprus, where the first ever Minister of Tourism, former student of mine, has initiated a policy where the government is going to cover vacation costs of any tourists who contract the coronavirus while holidaying there. And they've also dedicated a 100-bed COVID-19 hospital for the exclusive use of travelers. And again, this is all to give people the peace of mind that they can travel internationally and particularly to Cyprus in a safe and healthy way and be taken care of should something go wrong. So nice to see some more examples of innovative ways of governments working with local tourism.
And I'm curious to know, Demian, that the Honorable Minister of Tourism of Cyprus, for all of the smartness that he had in creating this whole free holiday concept, is that anything to do with the fact that you were one of his professors at EA?
I'm not so sure it's because of that. I like to think my students are successful despite me, not because of me. And knowing him, I'm not sure I would call him the honorable minister, but he is a great guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this policy works out this summer.
Well, I who work in diplomacy will refer to him as honorable, but he's your student, and clearly he's come out of that even stronger for it. If we look at what's coming out of this even stronger for it in terms of the industry, this is where it becomes very interesting. Some research was done recently around where are people prepared to spend in terms of the next 6 months. And what I thought was interesting about this consumer sentiment is that when it comes to the next 6 months of travel, it was actually, as we see from the green, it was the Chinese who were coming out the strongest. This is for many reasons. A, they went into the crisis sooner. So they're further along the life cycle. But as we said, they're still on second watch in terms of the risk of a second wave. Equally as well, as we saw with Labor Day, there was significant surge in terms of the amount of domestic activity. We've seen 30% of airlines in China are active again, pushing very much the ability for people to get out, but to get out safely. All of this is about cautionary easing of restrictions to see what happens. And as we see on the other countries, very much the Schengen zone as the EU opens up for the summer. We then move to the next slide. And this I found interesting because ultimately, what's the deal breaker around travel? Funnily enough, it's not the safety measures. It's very much about pricing. People are feeling insecure, not just in terms of travel, but their own finances. So ultimately, 43% of those that were surveyed came back and said, that is going to be a critical driver in terms of whether or not I travel. The 1 in 5 only coming back in terms of safety measures itself. I thought that was really interesting. But what I thought was very important was the next slide. And this came back in terms of forward keys sharing, a hypothesis that we shared a long time ago. As the lockdown started, people were stopped from traveling. Everyone was grounded and we all knew where we wanted to go on our next holiday. But the longer this went on, the more we got into our 100 days of lockdown, it was the heart that eclipsed holiday in terms of motivation. And where are we seeing the flight bookings coming up for especially Spain, Greece, and Portugal? It's VFR, visiting friends and relatives, and expat travel. People wanting to reconnect with the people they miss and they love, not necessarily places they want to go on holiday. This is a really interesting indicator because as we said, COVID-19 has shifted not just the value of travel, but the values of travel. And ultimately, the people we love are a destination in themselves. Tell me what else is going on in the industry.
I've got 3 examples for you. The first was an article I found that estimates the cost, additional cost to clean a 250-room hotel operating at 60% occupancy to be $130 a year in the United States. I'm not sure how accurate that number will end up being, but it was the first study I've seen that tries to quantify the cost of all these additional cleaning protocols that hotels are going to have to undertake. And obviously, this comes from, takes longer to clean a room, additional labor, and more expensive cleaning products. There are some things that will compensate that we may not be cleaning as often the room, and we won't be necessarily cleaning throughout the stay. So there could be some changes there, but it's important that we quantify that. On this slide, you'll see something else that I've been talking about a couple times on this show, which is the delivery aspect from restaurants. And not only do I want you to notice the rise in this over the last couple of months, but the growth and the difference between chain restaurants and independent restaurants and how much of delivery is really coming from chain restaurants right now. And I mention this because independent restaurants are talking a lot about the fact that they're actually losing money on almost every delivery because of the high fees that the delivery apps are charging them. It's almost not worthwhile staying in that side of the business. The chain restaurants, on the other hand, because of the large volume of deliveries that they do, the scale that they have across the country, they've got better rates and they're able to afford this more. And I bring this up because last week we talked with Elizabeth Blau a little bit about the fact that independent restaurants are in big danger of never opening again if they've closed now just because of the hard situation to make money. So keep track of that difference. And the third example that I wanted to bring up was about travel in airports in the United States. And this is data from TSA in the United States. And it's basically showing you a percentage of travelers from last year at this time that's taking place now. And these are people going through security. And forget the overall number, it's still very low, but we love to see that slowly increasing slope of that line, suggesting that more and more people are traveling. We're getting closer, still very far, but getting closer to approximating the numbers from last year. And so we just want to continue to see that number going up, always, as I like to stress, without an increase in the spread of the virus. So those are my 3 points for now.
And it's a great point because it's a slow percentage, but the trend is in the right direction. That's oh, thank heavens, and let's keep that positive and keep it healthy. So what we always say is that ultimately it's our viewers' questions that are critical. This whole space was created as a way of figuring out what's happening in the world. And we had some questions from last week we didn't get a chance to answer. And now we have the 30-second challenge. So Demian, throw me a question and I'll see if I can do it in 30 seconds.
Okay. So with the increased need for hygiene protocols in the current situation, will we see an increased demand or production of single-use plastics?
It's a great question. It happens over and over and over again, and that's being deemed as part of the protocols. But equally, we're finding that sustainability as a whole is being questioned. Does it still matter when people are trying to just get things moving again? As you found very much when you moderated a great panel in Hospitality Tomorrow too, and back in May, that ultimately people are wanting to make the changes and they're recognizing individually why it's so important that we now open up the world again sustainably and the individual power that we have in actually controlling that. For that reason, the industry is very much looking at opening and recovering through sustainable measures, to the point where our Secretary General has said sustainability has to be part of the DNA. And I always love this point because I know you're not listening to me, you're checking to see if I can do it in under 30 seconds. So
you're close. You're close.
Stunning. So I challenge you. Okay. Shrey wants to know, do you believe that the current scenario will lead to new cuisines and gastronomic methods as we open up into the new world? Go.
Well, I have to say I cheated and I called and spoke with 3 experts about this because I didn't really have an answer. Here are the 3 answers. 1, we're seeing an increase in comfort foods, right? These are these foods that make us feel good. They remind us maybe of our childhood or better times, usually rich in sugar or carbohydrates. So we're seeing an increase in that. It's not necessarily new, but there is a trend towards that. The second is the real impact is going to be on kitchen design. If this social distancing has to continue within the back of house, we're not necessarily going to be able to make all the same plates the same way as before. So you may see some innovation there, especially in these ghost kitchens that are very kitchen specific. And the third is wellness. More and more trends towards people eating healthier, plant-based foods are really rising in popularity. So not necessarily anything brand new, but definitely changes in trends.
So great answer, ×3. Great 3 responses from the people you reached out to. So I gave you 2 times 30.
No,
and you did it in 56 seconds.
It was not.
But the important thing is the quality of the answer, not the timing of the response. Thank you very much for that. So we move on, sir.
All right. So we like to look as well at what's going on in the world in terms of headlines that we've spotted during the week. And as always, we haven't shared these with each other. My first one is Express Spa pivots to coronavirus testing at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. And I love this because we've been talking for 9 weeks now about the importance and innovation and that companies find ways to pivot and address new needs that are arising because of the virus. Restaurants doing more delivery, hotels using rooms for offices or for gourmet meals in very private settings, etc. And here you have one at airports, which is something we're talking about today, from a very high-touch industry, spa, massage, etc. at the airport, and switches to saying, well, these travelers, a lot of them need to be tested for their travel. We're going to do that here instead. So I'm not really exactly sure how it's working, but I love the idea, and I like the fact that it's within these airports that are having a tough time catering to people in the airports.
That's a great one.
Second one, we're back to something we talked a little bit about last year, which is Las Vegas when we had Elizabeth Blau. But this one's about casinos reopen with cheap $30 a night rooms on the Strip. And I bring this up, it's in line a little bit with what the cruise industry has been doing, which is announcing when they start to sail again, very cheap fares, trying to attract people. And I think this is overall a strategy of saying, we want to fill up these casinos, we want to fill up these cruise ships, and we want to fill up these hotels to give confidence to people to say, look, people are coming, they're not afraid, and they're having a good time, and the protocols can be maintained, even though maybe that's not as true as possible, the protocols being adhered to. But it's also a big danger because all the past research into hotels, for example, that slash rates during difficult economic times, we find that it's very hard to get those rates back up again. And so it's never really an advisable strategy, largely because you're creating a perspective in the minds of the customer that this is the fair price for this establishment, and then trying to get them to pay more later is difficult. So understandable strategy to try to fill up the place, build occupancy, but a danger in terms of rate decreases. And the third example I've got is Marriott and Accor CEOs disagree on how quickly Europe's hotels will recover. And I bring this up because it was so interesting to see how different these two executives, Arne Sorensen and Sebastian Balzan, see Europe going forward. Arne's very concerned that Europe is very fragmented, lots of countries, lots of international travel driving hotels, which is not going to rebound very quickly. And Sebastian Balzan saying it's not as bad as all that. There's a lot more agreements. We have the Schengen agreement. But the real reason I show this is they're not sure, right? They disagree. Two very bright people on top of the industry, not in agreement, because these are unproven hypotheses that we've got, right? This is a case study live. No one's got answers. We've only got questions. So I think it's totally fine that our viewers and us don't have answers, and we may disagree, and we will eventually figure out what was what. But not to worry if you're not sure what's happening with the industry, your career, or our answers.
Those are three great headlines. And Demian, one thing I love about what you've just said now is the fact that that disagreement is extremely healthy. Sure. Because no one can own this. We're all living the great hypothesis. And ultimately, it's a matter of what's going to matter more going into the future, which is a perfect segue, interestingly, because we haven't seen each other's headlines, into my first one, which was a piece that was done recently from CNN Travel saying that safety is now the sexiest word in travel. And it's very interesting because this was actually an interview done with Richard Quest when he went to a luxury property in New York. And you'd think it's fascinating to see how we used to define quality of experience and luxury of experience is now being literally and figuratively sterilized. So it's interesting to see how this word is going to become part of the next normal. Because as we know, the protocols will shift once we understand what the cure is and the vaccine rollout schedules. But I thought this was interesting how safety is now the sexiest word in travel. But as we have said over and over, whether it's airlines, destinations, hotels, whatever it might be, competing on safety is not a good way to move forward. There's something just fundamentally wrong with saying safer than. We're all in this together. And if we don't all get through it, we're all going to lose, which is a perfect move into my next headline. And I had to share this because, as everyone will remember, we had a lovely, lovely guest in residence, executive in residence, on episode 6 alongside First Lady Tracy Windy, which was Puneet, who is the head of IHCL, but also the Tata Foundation in terms of the work they are doing with the Taj hotels. And I thought this was really beautiful. Because recently, Brand Finance, which is highly, highly regarded in India, did a ranking of all of the brands across the entire country. So not just hospitality, but all of the brands. And Taj came in #1. And funnily enough, it was not just about what it is as a business, but very importantly, and it's in this article itself, it's about corporate responsibility and corporate image. And we saw when Puneet talked about what they are doing for frontliners in terms of providing accommodation and the tens of thousands of meals. The Indian people are looking at this and they are watching with absolute admiration and appreciation. So I thought this is really special. This is not a time for profitability. We are in a primal time of survival. And what a beautiful nod to the Tata Group and to the Taj Hotel itself that they're doing the right thing at the right time. I thought this was beautiful. We then move on to my little video, and thank you for giving me credit in terms of having used up my 1.5 minutes last time. But this I thought was interesting. It was a campaign that was launched last week, and the message is clear in itself. Please.
We knew it was coming. The signs were all there. We knew we had to change. but we didn't. Destroying wild habitats, exploiting wildlife, turning a blind eye. Maybe it would go away. It didn't. It began to bite back. Primates had HIV, civets had SARS, bats and Ebola. COVID-19 is not the first pandemic, and it won't be the last. Unless we deal with the root causes. It's time to stop the wildlife trade and to support compassionate, sustainable farming to protect our planet. Let's change our relationship with nature forever. For all life on Earth.
I thought this was beautiful, and it reinforces why RISE was created. We must not waste this time. Mother Nature has grounded us, sent us back to our rooms. Let's think about how we go back into the world. So thank you for giving me those extra seconds to show off my latest video.
Yeah, very powerful. And I was glad not to see a single airplane in the video, especially because
rude.
We've got our second poll, and let's get that going so we can bring our guests on just after. All right, we've got in space for social distancing. So people, I guess that's a little bit the idea of how are we going to do that on an airplane and probably within the crowds of the airport as well, right? So people are concerned about the social distancing, crowd management, travelers not adhering to the protocol. So those would be the three. People don't seem to be concerned about the masks on the plane or the time required for testing very much. Let's bring on our two executives and see what they have to say about those results, please.
Yay, and I'm so excited to do this, and thank you, Demian, for allowing me to do the introduction and see if I can make them blush. We are very excited to have two great leaders, leading voices, and I must admit, colleagues that I absolutely love who are joining us today. We have with us Jeff POOLE from Amsterdam. He's the SVP of Advocacy at the World Travel and Tourism Council. You've all seen that we've used their statistics and their sound bites often on this program. He represents the global private sector in terms of travel and tourism. And he is alongside HALDANE DODD, Head of Communications at ATAG, Air Transport Action Group, an independent coalition of member organizations and companies throughout the global air transport industry. He coming to us from Geneva. I must say these two gentlemen are absolute officers and gentlemen of air travel. They are trusted, they are great colleagues, and we are so grateful. I am so grateful they're with us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, gentlemen, thanks for coming. Hopefully you saw those results, and I'd be curious what you have to say, whether that's in line with what you're hearing more generally, or is our audience slightly different? And what do you have to say about those concerns? Maybe Haldane, we can start with you.
Sure. I guess you can hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thanks for having me join you today. This has been a fascinating program so far. I think just reflecting on the results of that survey was quite interesting because the question of social distancing came up in that, and yet we heard earlier in the first survey that people were tending to be willing to go to activities that actually require a lot of close interaction. So getting back and having a haircut or going to a beauty salon or going to the dentist actually requires a very close and lengthy amount of interaction with somebody. And yet there's more concern about getting on board an aircraft maybe and having that social distancing question. But I think that's actually reflected quite often in a lot of the surveys that we've done of passengers across the world as well, that one of the key concerns for those passengers was sitting next to somebody on board an aircraft that might have COVID or another illness. And that is one of the key concerns of passengers and something that we do need to deal with as much as possible. Luckily, we've been working together as a whole industry with the UN authorities, particularly the International Civil Aviation Organization and the World Health Organization, and all the different parts of the aviation industry to come up with a set of standards that can be applied, hopefully, everywhere in the world to try and make sure that there's a standard, there's a series of protocols in place that try and alleviate some of those questions around physical distancing between passengers. But of course, when you're on an aircraft, You're in a very tight, constrained space. And the reality is, if we were to leave one seat free next to you, actually you're not going to be a whole meter away from the next passenger anyway. And that there are various other things that we can do to try and make that experience a safer one anyway. So the physical distancing is not necessarily always the correct solution.
Great. And Jeff, anything to add to that, especially maybe that issue of why are we so concerned to be close to someone on the plane, but not as concerned at the hairdresser? Is there a reason?
I suspect it's more to do with confinement and being with a lot of people. We've already seen, I think, as the restraints have been lifted in various countries, that people who were remarkably compliant by staying at home or physical distancing, once those limits are really off, people forget and they just go back to being human beings. And I think that's a key issue here. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we do have all of these public health and safety protocols in place, which we now have across the travel and tourism industry, to make people, first of all, feel safe so that they have the confidence to travel. But then when they are with us, whether that's in an airport or in the hands of an airline or at a hotel, then it's absolutely up to the industry to gently enforce those protocols. And it's much easier actually going through an airport process to enforce physical distancing. People already do it at immigration queues, etc., than it is walking down the local high street. One of the key issues I found surprising, it's because from an industry point of view, we look at this through the other end of the telescope, is actually the issue of time for testing was so short there. Because from our point of view, that's a huge issue, because all of these other issues are basically about passenger flow through airports, into aircraft, through hotel lobbies, etc. But the pre-start of all of that is ensuring that people have been tested. Right. Now, and that's why we're advocating for that to be done away from the airport, so that when people get to the airport, they don't arrive and then have 2, 3, 4, 5 hours waiting for test results. Because what does that do? It puts everybody together in a confined space. So we have to work through those issues as an industry and with the appropriate regulatory authorities.
Thank you.
Jeff, can I build on that? And actually, Jeff and Haldane, because one thing that I'm very concerned about, and it's lovely, Jeff, that you're now with WTTC, having come from IATA and CANSO, the aviation side. My big concern is from a traveler perspective. You've got all the protocols being put in place that IATA's developed, ICAO's developed, WTTC has developed, UNWTO has developed, WHO has developed, CDC, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work. But nothing is in place to ensure that the travelers behave. So I might be sitting on an aircraft beside Haldane or Demian on the other side, and I decide to take my mask off. And then Demian gets uptight with me, and there's this whole air rage that starts. What is in place to make sure that the travelers respect the protocols being put in place for them, knowing that the traveling world is frustrated, is fearful, and confidence is so critical?
For me, I think it's, Haldane's closer to aviation, the discussions in aviation, but for me, it's about the explanations of why these things are necessary. And it's also, to a large extent, relying on common sense of people. Now that's quite a fickle commodity, of course. But I think if you, to take the example that you've just used, Anita, you took your mask off. I think every other passenger and crew member in the plane would be telling you to put it back on again. So I don't think that sort of behavior will be either seen as reasonable or acceptable, because there is, I hate the word usually, but there is a new norm. People understand that they all have to travel, so this is the way that it's going. This is the only way that they can all do it. And if people start misbehaving, then it ruins it for everybody.
True. So it's a silent peer pressure. Haldane, what do you think?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. I think that peer pressure does exist. I think you will always find people who want to flout those rules. One of the things that a number of airlines have put in place is a strong request or a requirement to wear a mask, but it's not mandatory. And one of the reasons that they don't want to put in place that mandatory requirement from an airline or company perspective is just that it would require the cabin crew to become police officers in that regard. And so you've got Anita, who's disobeying us and taking her mask off, and suddenly it becomes an incident that could end up leading to an aircraft having to be diverted because you're not complying with cabin crew instructions at that point. And we're starting to divert aircraft based on whether passengers are wearing masks, even though 95, 99% of the passengers on board that aircraft have worn a mask, and therefore the layers of protection that we've been advising have been kind of met. The survey that IATA did of passengers back in April, and this has just been updated last week, but we don't have the results just yet, shows that actually wearing masks was one of the most likely thing that passengers are very willing to do in order to travel again. And interestingly enough, one of the things that would make passengers feel most comfortable is temperature checks. So as you arrive at an airport, before you get into the terminal, or as you arrive in a country, having your temperature checked seemed to be something that made passengers feel more comfortable. Now, there's a big question over the efficacy of those tests, and particularly as we start hearing more and more about asymptomatic transmission of this virus. But there seems to be a level of comfort that people are taking this seriously. And I'll sort of recount a personal anecdote. Being in Singapore for the Singapore Air Show in February, when COVID was very big in Southeast Asia, but not so much in Europe at that point. Going out to a restaurant there and having all the staff wearing masks, wearing gloves, big notices saying how often they disinfect the tables and so forth. Even though I didn't necessarily think that the temperature checks that you had on arrival or the masks were necessarily helping at that stage, it showed that the restaurant was taking this seriously. And I think that's one of the levels of comfort that we've got to get across to passengers. So whether that is temperature checks, the social distancing or physical distancing being observed, masks, every little thing we can do to add up to that feeling of comfort that we are taking this seriously will help. And that's a good thing to get across to restaurants and to hotels as well. It's not just in the air travel side.
We've seen actually, well, we've asked our audience some questions. They want to see the protocols being exhibited and practiced. Even if they're not that effective, they need that reassurance. So we're going to see hotels being cleaned during the day rather than at night so customers can see that. I don't know if we have time for one more question, Anita, or you want to switch to the audience?
I think we go to the audience.
Okay, let's do it. Sarah, we have questions for Jeff and Haldane?
Yes, we do. So we have an anonymous question asking, how can we position ourselves regarding air travel in the necessary approach of a more sustainable form of tourism?
Either one of you feel comfortable taking that, Haldane?
Yeah, sure. So this is one of the things that my organization works on almost full time is around air travel and sustainability. And our key role has been in getting the industry to come together around issues of climate change and how we can work together as an industry on climate change. And so up until COVID really took off or made us land all of our aircraft, that was the key thing that we were working on. And as travel starts to rebuild again, that will be the focus again for a lot of the constituent parts of the aviation industry. How can we do this better in the future? Because I think that despite all the economic challenges and particularly the economic state of travel and tourism, which has been probably the hardest hit sector out of any in the economy, there is a recognition now that, as Anita was saying, it was showing in that video, that actually the role of nature, the role of the environment, the role of climate change and our response to it is a really important part of us coming out of this. How can we do things better in the future? And that's something that we're going to be focusing on even more than we have in the past. And I think that we have the systems in place, the policies in place as an aviation sector to make sure that we can deliver on a number of the things that we've set, the number of the goals that we've set for reducing our CO2 emissions. I can go through those, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Jeff, I think you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, on behalf of travel and tourism, more broadly than that, first of all, I agree with absolutely everything that Haldane has said. You know, sustainability in tourism has recently been a big issue. And we're not just talking about carbon footprints and other emissions. We're talking about single-use plastics, food waste, illegal wildlife trade, human trafficking, and so on. So our efforts to become more sustainable have actually just been really beginning to gain momentum. And then COVID-19 comes in. 2 points here. One is that my personal belief is that the consumer will be demanding sustainable tourism in a much bigger way, as will government authorities. So we need to step up our game even further and have increased challenges and targets. But secondly, there are many people in business who feel that it may be easier for us to do this now because it may be easier for us to introduce sustainable tourism practices when we're growing from zero, rather than trying to layer them on top of a huge industry that was growing and growing and growing. So I think there's commitment, intention, and hope all together in that picture.
I just want to follow up, if it's okay. Are you actually seeing the airlines coming up with new policies that they're implementing already or going to implement, or are they in such dire financial straits that they can't do anything that's going to risk additional costs as they rebound?
I think what we're seeing right now is airlines fighting for survival. So that their current focus is, how do we build ourselves back up again so that we are in a decent enough position? How do we keep our staff on? How do we let go of staff that we can't afford to keep on for the next couple of years? But at the same time, the commitments that were in place before COVID hit are being reinforced, and you'll have a number of airlines that are saying, as we do this, we know we're going to do this with sustainability at top of mind. Unfortunately for us, there are a couple of key things that we need to do to improve our sustainability as a sector. One of them is invest in new technology, and airlines, the whole industry, have been doing that for years and years anyway, which is why our efficiency has been improving the last 30 years, 40 years. But that involves buying new aircraft, and aircraft are expensive. There's just no way around that. The other thing is investing in new types of fuel. So how do we accelerate the energy transition away from fossil fuels and towards sustainable aviation fuels? That's a key area of focus for all of us. Again, that's an expensive thing, but there's a real opportunity for governments here to help support a sustainable transition and also improve economic development, build new economies around green energy in various different parts of the world. Beyond what they have already. So that's one of the key points that we're going to be making to governments and also to our energy suppliers, the big oil companies, to say, how can we work together to make sure that we're getting this type of energy at the same price or not too much more expensive than jet fuel as it is at the moment, and sort of build on our growth as we come back.
Okay. Sarah, let's get another question.
Yes, we've had a question come in from Singapore. Do you see air travel becoming significantly more expensive, considering that some, if not most, business travel will stay on a much lower level than previously?
Jeff, we're going to see price increases?
When you look at the airline economic model, I think that's an interesting challenge, given that cost and price have never been that closely related in the past. I think I would answer the question by saying I believe that the costs will go up for the airline industry because of all of these measures that need to be taken. And indeed, when you see load, that also is then affected by the load factors, whether that's the total number of passengers on board or the differential, the split between business and passengers. So I think that's there. In other words, the costs will go up, and there will therefore be quite a lot of pressure on the pricing side on airlines as well. But I think when you're in your earlier speech there, or presentation, you were talking about look at all these cut price deals from hotels to get people back in hotels. Well, the airlines are doing the same thing. Right. So where does that that bizarre airline economics model of price versus cost, that will change, but I don't think anybody yet understands that fully.
Indeed. Excellent.
This kind of goes to the point that was being made before about the difference of opinion between Marriott and core CEOs as to where this is going to go. I think nobody in the industry quite knows at this point anyway. You will probably see a bit of a price war as airlines try and fill their aircraft again over the next 6 months or so. But it depends how many airlines still survive in a year's time as to how much competition there is. Yeah. So we might see prices start increasing after that point. We just don't know at this stage.
It's a good point, though. It's a re-engineering of the industry and the individual entity as you go forward. Excellent.
Time for another question?
There is.
Sarah?
Great. Rohit asks, why is the norm for social distancing applicable to restaurants and not airlines? There's close to zero distancing in an aircraft between passengers. However, in restaurants, it's a lot wider between, as if it's less important for a restaurant to be financially stable versus airlines.
So we got at this a little bit before. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Especially, I understand that the window and the aisle are still not 2 meters apart. So should it be one person per row?
So do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Sure. So I think that there's a fundamental difference between the air conditioning systems, literally, on board an aircraft versus other types of building, including restaurants and cafes, and even just your normal office building or school. The way that air conditioning systems work on board aircraft and the airflow works on board aircraft is very powerful. For a start, the air comes in from the top of the cabin and gets pushed down to the bottom of the cabin and out. If you're on board an aircraft sitting in the window seat, you'll notice these little grills along the bottom. That's the extraction of the air. And so you'll see the air, well, you can't see the air obviously, but you'll notice that the air will come down and come out the bottom. And therefore, if someone sneezes or coughs, generally the droplets will go down rather than spread across the same way as you would in a normal air-conditioned space. The other thing is that the air gets replaced every 2 to 3 minutes. The entire air on board a cabin gets replaced every 2 or 3 minutes in an aircraft. Whereas for a normal building, it's about 5 times an hour, so once every 20 minutes or so. The other point is that we have very, very high-level air conditioning filters. So we use HEPA filters, which are the same filters that are used in hospital operating rooms to get rid of all the kinds of viruses, bacteria, fungi, smells, various other things that come out of the recirculated air. And we also have 50% recirculated and 50% fresh air every 2 minutes or 2 to 3 minutes. So there's a very different environment created in that sense.
I'm going to ask Jeffrey a real quick follow-up if it's okay. We understand the science. I absolutely believe everything that Haldane has just said, but the perception is the airplane is dangerous, right? The travelers are bringing the virus across borders. We heard a lot about that before. Airports are crowded. Everybody seems to get sick when they travel and go through an airport. So is that the major challenge right now, is convince customers that it's safe to travel and it's not more likely to get sick and more likely to get sick in a restaurant? Is that the major challenge?
I think it is in theory, but I believe that the human behavior comes into this as well. So we as the industry are saying we need to provide the assurances to the traveller on public health safety protocols in place, so distancing, following all the guidelines, etc. But the customer behavior is also an issue here. And that right now there's absolutely no suggestion that people aren't willing to crowd into an aircraft and travel. That requirement to travel, whether that's to visit family and friends, as Anita was saying, or because you're going on holiday, that wanderlust seems to overcome people's inhibitions. People are selective as to when their inhibitions come into play.
Thank you. Anita, you want to? I think we're probably out of time.
Sadly, that's it. I've been given the cue from the Wizards of Oz that sadly that is it for the time. So I have a question for you both though, because as we said in the briefings, RISE was created as a word, as a name, as a title for a program that was about keeping the industry together and looking forward. I would love to understand from each of you, as an acronym, as was turned into some of our executives and residents a few programs ago, what does the word RISE mean to you? Haldane, you are a master communicator. The R, the I, the S, and the E, please.
I don't know about master communicator. I've come up with something slightly cheesy, I guess, but I would say that for me anyway, it talks about being a recovery which is integrated, sustainable, and exciting.
Huh.
The integrated part is really about working together. And it's something that in ATAG, we try and ensure that the whole industry works together on these challenges. And actually, we've seen a really good response to the question of working together across the various UN agencies, across the industry, and even further afield in the wider travel and tourism industry with organizations like Jeff's. The sustainable part is really key to what we do and what we are trying to do. So I think that that's going to become even more important as we come out of that, as I said before. And the exciting part is maybe a little bit left of field, but actually I think that there's a really exciting opportunity here. We don't often get to restart an industry or restart a sector and think about how we do things better. And I find that exciting. It's challenging for a lot of people. You know, there's been a huge cost to this from a personal perspective, but actually this is a really exciting opportunity if we grasp it as well.
That's very true. Jeff, the cheesy gauntlet has been thrown down.
I know, follow that. Well, as usual, Haldane and I are pretty much aligned on that, because for me, the R is about recovery as well. And I started out along the lines of recovery is soon expected. But then I thought that wasn't I didn't have the excitement in it, as Haldane was saying. So for me, it's now recovery is sparking enthusiasm. Or sparking excitement.
Sorry, Haldane. I'm going to give that one to Jeff.
He's always your favorite, Anita.
Haldane,
it's the burden that I'm happy to bear.
Demian, save me.
Look, I'm going to wish you both a great afternoon, and thank you so much. We've been talking a lot in the background about aviation and air travel throughout the last 8 weeks, and it was great to have you both here to really explore things in a bit more detail. Maybe in a couple of months, we can have you back to see how things progressed and what's worked out and what hasn't. I think that'll be really interesting to see.
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Huge
Thank
love
you very much. Thank you.
Thank both of you as well.
Very good, very good. I thought the issue of, just like with the restaurants and just like the hotels and resorts that we've seen, this idea of what's the responsibility of the industry, what's the responsibility of the traveler or the customer. And I think when people look back at this time for our industry, I think that's going to be one of the major, parts of this case study will be how did that balance work out?
Indeed. And it goes back to, again, why the blessing of this creation came about, to make sense of it all so we can make informed decisions. Lovely. So as always, going very quickly, please do send us your explanations of what does RISE mean to you. Send it through to our Twitter account, rise_weekly. And we look forward to seeing what you think about what's ahead and what RISE can actually mean in the future. We now go to one of my favorite sections. I will spend no time on it. Over to you, Grouch. What are you concerned about?
I've got two concerns. The first one is something I was thinking about all week as I thought about this, which is, I'm still concerned about everything I was concerned about 93 days ago. I was concerned about small businesses surviving, concerned about people following protocols, about finding a vaccine, about the economy. And it's 93 days later, and I don't think I'm less concerned about anything. If anything, I've got more concerns than before. So I wanted to bring that up and just sort of vent that. And then I think my second concern is something that Haldane said when he talked about, we've got a chance to restart from zero. And I guess my concern is, will the firms do this? Will industries and firms say, you know what, we've paused, now's the chance. I understand we're in financial straits, and they may not be able to. So the concern is, will they, if they can, will they restart and do things more sustainably and find better ways to compete? And if they can't, what does that mean for the future?
Great 2 points. First, confidence about your concern. Your concerns may exist, but I'm confident they're more informed than they were 93 days ago. Okay. In terms of the future, I'm confident that 93 days on, consumers and travelers are going to demand from the industry and from their product providers that they're more sustainable. So that push is going to come at a higher level because the pull is going to be seen like never before. That's my confidence.
All right, often, I think I'm right, but I hope you are.
I look forward to saying, I told you so. So, any more questions out there?
Sarah, we got time for maybe 2 questions?
I think we have time for a quick one.
Okay.
So Anonymous asked, given that the current situation has been an eye-opening experience, how can hotel chains encourage and implement sustainable measures despite this recession?
Yeah, we had that discussion on that hospitality tomorrow that Anita alluded to before. I think it's a little bit, it's going to be, how are the chains going to differentiate themselves from each other going forward? Right? What are customers going to be looking for? We know that they're looking for safety and cleanliness, and everybody's doing that, and they're going to probably not compete on that as much as just say, we are all doing this. And I think sustainability is probably that number 2 concern that the traveling customers, they're going to say, well, you had a chance now to rethink things and to do things a little bit better. What are you doing now about this? And it's going to be hard to keep pushing that away. And I guess that's the hope, right? That these chains are finding that. So not everything takes money, right? Not everything has to be expensive. Innovation can save us money if it's done properly. So hopefully we're going to see some leadership really from the Marriotts and Accors of the world and saying, we're going to push this even further. And that's the hope, I think.
Indeed. And on top of that as well, I think what's important is every hotel, every business is questioning, why were we doing this? Like you said with McDonald's shortening down their menu. Similarly, if we go from paper straws to pasta straws to bamboo straw, why do we need straws? Eliminate the straws. So there's an opportunity to clean up the offering in a way that ultimately saves money and allows for more sustainable practices because we're not doing it anymore.
And even though that was the only question we had time for now, don't forget after the show, Anita and I will be back on to answer the other questions that you might have had for us.
Brilliant. So before we move into the close itself, please don't forget that we want you to tell us, what is your COVID-19 story? We've spent all these days together. All of us are going through it in a different way. So please do share, and we're going to show you Scott's story this week.
It's a good one.
Oh, it's your birthday.
Hi Anita, surprise! This isn't my COVID-19 story this week. We just all want to wish you a very happy birthday. It's an honor to work with you every single day, and I hope you have the best birthday ever and a wonderful year ahead.
Hi Anita, happy birthday. I hope you have an incredible day. Thank you for being such a great mentor to me, and I just hope you have a fabulous year ahead.
Hi Anita, just wanted to wish you a very, very happy birthday. I know it might not be the birthday that you thought you were going to have, but I still hope that it brings you as much joy and happiness as you bring to us. It's such an honour getting to work with you every day, and I really hope you have a truly spectacular day.
Hi Anita, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure working with you these past couple of weeks. You're so energetic and inspirational. It's always so much fun. And, well, now your birthday's coming up, so a big happy birthday to you. I hope you have a lovely day.
Welcome to Rise, live from Lausanne, where the crowd seemed to be out in droves, everybody wanting to celebrate Anita's birthday today. Anita, I love you. Thanks so much for these great 100 days.
Happy birthday, Anita.
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 Oh man, you guys are all fired.
There was a big prediction that you would cry.
And happy birthday to Katya as well, who celebrates the same day as I do, that also Barry Manilow celebrates. A little bit of trivia.
We've had a lot of birthdays in the last couple of weeks.
There are a lot of Geminis on this show. So I have nothing more to say. I'm going to let you close it, Demian. Okay. I'll give you the last word.
Sure.
Thank you.
As always, we'd love to hear from you. RiseWeekly2020 @gmail. Follow us on Twitter. Past episodes are at rise-weekly.com. Next week, we've got a really different show for you. It's called the Media News versus Noise. We've got people here from CNN and Hotel News Now to help us understand what's the media's role in informing people and separating the news from the noise so that we can all make good decisions for our lives and our traveling. And with that, I will tell you, as Anita usually says, stay safe, stay home, stay well, stay healthy, keep your hands clean, and we will see you next week. And for those that are staying with us, we'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Birthday, Anita.
Wow, that was really special. Thank you very, very, very much. And to all the Geminis out there, a very happy birthday as we have our last week of being Geminis for this year.
Well, I think we're actually Geminis all year, aren't we?
Well, yes. Stunning.
Let's see if there's any questions for us. Sarah?
Yes, we've had a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
So we have an anonymous question. What are your views and how do you think the government support given to hospitality, travel, and tourism related industries will impact these companies, the employees, and the future employees, such as those graduating from hotel management schools?
I'll let you take that one.
Well, it's a loaded one. Look, I think it's country specific and it's regional specific, and I don't think anybody knows what's working, right? There are countries that have said we are going to pay 80% of the employee salary as long as you don't furlough or fire them, and we'll see if that's worked. In the U.S., they followed something differently, and now they're saying we're not going to extend this payment to people past July. And I don't want to get political, but for reasons that are a little strange, I think. And then if you look at industries, the airlines have really been supported. There's a lot of concerns, we didn't really get into this in the conversation, that come the autumn when a lot of the payments to the airlines are going to end, what's going to happen? Are they going to be able to continue to employ everybody? And if not, I don't think there's going to be jobs for people that want to go into that right away. I think what you've got to be looking at as well is what are the industries doing to work with the governments, right? We can't just expect the governments to come on and say, hey, we've got all these solutions. So a lot of lobbying going on. There's competition. We talk always about tourism and hospitality, but we know that retail is severely hit. We know the medical industry has had some issues because people haven't been going in for elective surgery. So we're in competition, our industry, with other ones for the fight for survival. For the people that are graduating and going to work, we've been saying this for 9 episodes, right? You can't sit back and expect the jobs to come to you. Build up this CV. What parts of the industry are more interesting? Think about innovation. Think about entrepreneurship. Don't expect that corporate job or that, to be there, especially if restaurants are less busy, if hotels decide that they have to operate with less customers, if airlines, don't have occupancy. You have to be proactive here. There isn't an answer. There are millions of possible answers. You have to find the one that's right for you.
If I can build on that, because I think, Demian, what you said is really, it's incredibly thorough and holistic, and you're absolutely right. What's also coming back from different countries, as you said, and regions, is the fact that all of these government bailouts, a lot of these are happening from governments that didn't have money in the first place. So that's a huge issue, that the US putting initially trillions into the industry through airlines, those were countries that had the trillions to invest. Then you've got other countries, especially developing countries, that rely on travel and tourism. The governments didn't have the money in bailouts to begin with. So I think what's really important is, as you were saying, we all need to stop and start making the case as to why our industry is essential. Because otherwise we will be seen as the periphery of the under industries we're competing with. This is a really challenging time. One thing I have learned through this time, as we come out of it, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing at governments, at industries, at leaders. Everyone is living one of the most unexplained, surreal, answerless, still unresolved crisis of our entire lives. Forget our careers. We need to suspend judgment and make sure everyone moves forward together. Because to stop and to point fingers and to blame doesn't help us get to where we need to as a global community and then as an industry.
Agreed. Sarah, another question?
Yes. Shrey asks, do you believe the hotel, travel, and tourism industries will need to place emphasis on strengthening the psychological state of employees to ensure the safety standards while preserving a degree of decorum and professionalism?
I would say 1,000%. And this is something that Wolfgang brought up actually in our first episode. And Gerhard as well was commenting on that one of the critical stakeholders in bringing travel and tourism back to life is the employees, or are the employees, because ultimately they have as much reason to be fearful of going back as the travelers do. If anything, they have more reason because they know the culture of health and hygiene in the hotel. But if Demian walks in and someone thinks, oh, he doesn't have his mask on, they're going to feel threatened by the guests coming in. So I think this is exactly as Haldane and Jeff were saying, this is psychological contracting across everyone that's involved in this. So that's why the peer pressure of responsibility is an interesting aspect of it, but absolutely.
Yeah, and I was talking to a corporate trainer for one of the big chains the other day, and she was saying that they've had to rethink all the training for the employees, not just for the health and safety protocols, but also for how do we deal with guests who either look like they might be ill, who aren't following protocols, who are worried, and saying we are trusting the health and safety of our guests to our lowest paid employees who often change organizations regularly. And that's a big, not only a big responsibility for the company, but a big risk as well. So I think for the company and the employee, this is a major issue. And I think, again, like I said before, I think this will be one of the things we'll look back on later and say, which organizations were able to manage this better with their employees.
And I think as well, in the initial days of opening up, this is going to be a really tough one. I've got a bunch of girlfriends that I get together with, and we've agreed we're not going to get together again. We used to always have our little bubbles group. We're not going to get together again until we can hug, because it's going to be so difficult instinctively once you finally see each other to not give that hug. So I don't want, as much as I love seeing you every week, Demian, I don't want to see you at a local restaurant if I can't see you smile because you have a mask on. So there's going to be that challenge as well, of just human nature instinctively wanting to get closer. And we can't.
I'm such a big smiler, that show. Let's take one more question, Sarah, if you got one.
Yes, Gary asks, during a time when wearing a mask is the norm, how will hearing impaired people who read lips be impacted, and how will companies deal with these customers?
Yeah,
yeah, good one.
That is such an important one. And it even at the very beginning of all of this, March, April, I'm sure many of you saw that people even avoided eye contact. And this is where compassion needs to be considered. Someone not listening to someone asking to stay 2 meters away. Could be because they just can't hear. But that's a really important one that makes those who are hearing impaired even more needing of support. But we need to find a way of making sure people understand they can't see the lips that need to be read. Very scary aspect.
Good. Sarah, is there any more, or should we end this show?
I have another one if you
want.
An anonymous question. Has this perceived sense of security been constant through the trajectory of the airline and hospitality industry, or has health and safety only been recently truly incorporated?
I mean, I'll take a quick, and then I think Anita probably has more to say. I think it's more visible now. We're talking about it more. I think it's always been there, right? I mean, I used to run hotels, and it was always about, you had to be clean, we had to have security, don't tell a guest or someone who calls what room somebody is in. So it's always been there. You just didn't notice it as much. And that's the thing. We cleaned rooms at night. We cleaned the lobby at night when you were asleep and wouldn't see it, because who wants to see people cleaning? Now you want to see it cleaning. You want to see the products being used. And so it's more visible, but and probably a bit more important than before in new ways, but it's always been there.
Indeed. But I think as Demian is saying, what's interesting about this is like exactly what Haldane was saying. Asymptomatic people aren't going to have a temperature. So taking my temperature at the airport, if I have COVID-19, doesn't really matter, but people need tangible proof. And that's why this has been such a bizarre phenomena. Its invisibility has made it all the more complex and primal. And that's why I keep saying, if it was purple, if I could see a purple splotch, I know where it is. But because people can't, we swing to the side of fear and suspicion. What I find fascinating about this whole thing, biometrics have always been a critical part of our industry in terms of managing flows, managing security, managing information. And yet people didn't want to give up their information because of the whole data protection. And yet we're okay social tracing and doing all of the contact tracing. That's really bizarre, because it could be a matter of someone might not want to give up their email address, but they're telling me all the people they shouldn't have been with in the last 2 weeks. So there's going to be a really bizarre calibrating or recalibrating around what are we trying to protect ourselves, or are we actually stopping ourselves from being protected by the people who are trying to protect us. But those are, if you can follow that line of logic, God bless you.
I think I did. Jeff, what was the last, he said something about the RISE acronym. Did you write it down? That was something that came up.
I've got Haldane's written down, but Jeff just won it, so I didn't even bother.
Look, there's something about this pausing and restarting,
yes.
And you know, it's exciting. I think it was that. I think maybe it was Haldane, the exciting opportunity to see what we can do in the future. And I'm just hoping that there's enough of that one day we look back and we say, with all the human tragedy and loss, at least these positive things came out of it, right? Better wildlife protection, more sustainability, more appreciation for other people, for the things that we take for granted. And I just hope that it's not just vaccine comes and we forget about this period and we talk about it, because economists are going to be talking about this for 100 years, but you know, hopefully as people, we grow from this. And I talk with my kids quite a bit about that we have to see how we as individuals and as a family, you know, use this to be strong in the future.
But it's so nice that you say that, because I keep thinking that, and I ask people, what will you miss of this time? Right. I mean, if I think of if this blur of 100 days had been there, and quite honestly, I didn't have RISE, that momentum, that creativity, that togetherness, you know, what would I have done during this time without you, Demian?
Probably drink more champagne. And, yeah. No, I agree. It's the defining thing for me. What I will remember from these 100 days or however long is this show. And so thank you for that. And,
all about changes.
Yeah, I'm going to end the show then. I'm going to say to everybody, thank you for watching. If you like the show, tell your friends. If you don't like the show, don't tell anybody. And feel free to post a note to Anita for her birthday, and Katya as well. So
thank you. Take care, everyone, and thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Anita.